Well, let's tell you about mineral-rich Mongolia with ambitions to become a destination for mining investment. It's been working with the London Stock Exchange to modernise and develop its capital markets. What does it mean for the landscape, though, in that country? How will it impact mining investment here? Travis Hamilton is Managing Director at Carson Investment Management, joins us live from Singapore. Let's just first understand, if we can, the nature and structure of your business. What are you in the business of doing?
Well, Carson, it's a pleasure speaking with you. Carson Investment Management is a single-country Mongolian-focused investment house. So we run a Mongolian equities fund, but beyond that, we also act as a conduit between offshore capital or offshore intellectual property and technology and onshore opportunities in Mongolia.
What is the biggest, I suppose, threat to surviving and thriving in that economy as you see it right to the minute? What's on your radar?
Well, Mongolia is obviously a very tiny frontier market. It has a massive resource endowment, very little infrastructure. It's a very young democracy. Whenever one is going into an emerging or frontier market, there are obviously issues with governments, with information asymmetry, etc. And for us, obviously, the biggest challenge was to find the right partners onshore to work with. I don't think it's possible to go into these markets, without experienced and knowledgeable onshore partners. In terms of opportunities, you've already referenced the mining and mineral resource sector, which is obviously investment into that sector is driving growth throughout the economy at present. But we see huge opportunities in other areas of the economy, from the agriculture sector, financial services. It's a burgeoning economy that's going to see double-digit GDP growth for the next decade.
And yet the President's Chief of Staff reportedly saying he doesn't want to see his country turned into Mongolia. A sense that wealth should be exploited cautiously to benefit all. It doesn't have to be unlocked in a generation. How do you persuade investors that they have to be patient on this story?
Well, I think it's most important to first recognize that Mongolia is a democracy. It's not a dictatorship. It's not under a military regime. Everybody in the country does have a voice. Unlike other markets, there is no civil unrest, ethnic violence or ethnic cleansing. Politicians around the world say and do things that perhaps the party doesn't agree with. I think many in Mongolia do recognize the significant wealth that they have, and that will really be the first step to prosperity, is to start unlocking that wealth.
What do you make of what's been a very laissez-faire approach to running the economy, but following that, I suppose, that interregnum, there's now much more of a regulatory oversight approach being employed. What would you say companies have to be most mindful of as that begins to develop?
Well, it is a developing capital market. It's a developing legislative landscape. It's only been just over 2 decades since the country abandoned its single-party socialist system in favour of a parliamentary democracy and an open capital market. So one just needs to be aware that this is it's fluid development, etc. But I think that the government is focused
you have an election in June, yes, but that government may not be around because there's a presidential election in June, and it's reportedly the case that mining companies and playing hardball with them will be a vote winner.
Well, the election that we have in June is a presidential election. Now, the president of Mongolia is a figurehead. It doesn't have a large amount of executive responsibility attached to the post. Parliamentary elections were held last year. It's a 4-year set term. The current president, President Obek, is a member of the Democratic Party, the ruling party at the moment. Everything would point to the fact that the incumbent, President Obek, will win. A recent poll suggested that he was as much as 13 percentage points ahead of his rival. It's our expectation, certainly, that he will win. And I think that then that would signify we have at least 3 years of political stability and certainty before the next parliamentary elections, which will be held in 2016.
He's on the record as saying, quote, "The time has come for the government to take Oyu Tolgoi matters into its own hands." By that he really means giving Mongolian employees more management positions on the project. Is that going to help or hinder getting copper concentrate to market by June?
Well, I think, politicians, as I said, the world over say and do things and then will often backtrack and correct them. And that was something certainly that President Obek mentioned earlier in the year in January. Subsequently, he stated that the government must do everything it can to ensure that production meets the forecast delivery of June of this year. Given my recent discussions with the Prime Minister Altan Huyag, as well as the Mining Minister Gan Huyag, it's very clear that the government is focused on ensuring commercial production is started by June. And it's our strong expectation that we'll see copper concentrate export before the end of the month of June.
What's your plan B if things do turn pear-shaped? In terms of a strategy, you put all your eggs in one basket, so you can get very wealthy or it can all blow up.
Well, as I mentioned, there are various sectors of the economy within which we invest. Mining and mineral resources is one area. We do have a large exposure to that sector, given the very limited investment universe within which we are investing. However, we've invested in industry-leading companies and sector-leading companies in consumer staples, in building materials, in consumer discretionary products. Companies that we've invested in onshore are trading at the moment on historical price-earnings ratios of less than 6, sometimes 5.5. Several companies that we have invested in already are expecting 25 to 30% sales growth this year due to export initiatives that the companies are undertaking. And we see huge opportunities investing there into established companies, profitable companies with very strong cash flows that nobody else in the world is really looking at.
How do you judge Australian interest in what you're, I suppose, offering? To tell me about the level of buoyancy in this market.
To be perfectly honest, it's been somewhat dismissive. I think Australian investors are typically very Australian-centric. However, I would urge them now to consider to look offshore. The mining sector in Australia, which has driven the economy there obviously for quite some time, the sun is really setting. I think the former mining minister in Australia has even said that the mining boom is coming to an end. And quite frankly, Australia will not be competitive with regards to mineral or resource exports in the years to come. Mongolia's growth, however, is not driven by growth in the Chinese economy. It's simply a China supply story. And Mongolia will continue to deliver ever-increasing amounts of resources, vastly cheaper prices than Australia can.
We should say,
so
of course,
I was an Australian investor, I would...
You're bullish, I know that, but S&P, the backdrop of it is it's lowered its rating outlook to negative from stable. It's also affirmed that certainly the Central Asian countries' BB- long-term and B- short-term sovereign credit ratings, which are both junk. Travis Hamilton there, MD at Carson Investment Management in Singapore.